Stay hungry, stay foolish.
Today's episode is an intimate and inspirational exploration of Stephen Hawking, a man that touched the lives of millions. It is also a story of friendship written by his friend and physicist and renowned author of multiple titles including Subliminal, Elastic, Euclid's Window, Feynman's Rainbow, The Upright Thinkers, The War of Worldviews with Deepak Chopra, and 2 books co-authored with Stephen Hawking himself. This book today is Stephen Hawking, a memoir of friendship and physics, and our guest today is the brilliant author Leonard Mlodinow. Welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
Before we even start today, I want to pass on my sympathies. I know you lost your mother during this pandemic, and she was a fighter. She was a Holocaust survivor, and I just wanted to honor her, and perhaps you wanted to say a word on that relationship, because I know she had a huge impact on your life.
Well, thanks, Aidan. Yeah, she had a huge, what can I say? She was a great mother and inspiration. She always made me feel that I could do whatever I set my mind to, and gave me the confidence to approach the world that way and to be resilient and take the knocks and not get a big head when I had successes and just to move forward, following my passions and knowing that I could, making me feel that I could accomplish anything. So she was a survivor, as was my dad, Holocaust survivors, and I think the people who got through it had to have that kind of resilience. Not that she didn't have her quirks, which I write about it in great detail, but yes, thank you. I really miss her.
Well, it's great, man. And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, so she's passed on and your father great traits to you. But let's get into this book, because this is a tribute that you've written to both your friendship with Stephen Hawking, but also to the man himself. And I thought I'd start with a little passage that I took from the book. So it goes as follows. Stephen was world famous for stirring up the physics world, for writing about it, and for doing all that from within a broken body. But just as challenging to someone who cannot move, and especially to someone who cannot speak, is to maintain long-term friendships, to develop deep relationships, and to find love. Stephen knew that it was human bonds, love, and not just his physics that nourished him, and in that too, he had succeeded beyond reasonable expectation. I thought we'd use that as a way to set context for how you and Stephen developed this remarkable friendship.
Well, that's really true. People, when they think about him, they think about his work. They think of him as a great physicist and what he had to overcome to survive and to do the kind of work that it seems impossible to do all in your head without a blackboard or without really being able to easily read other papers or talk at length with other people. But of course, I think in his life, what's more important in all of our lives is not just our work; it's our personal relationships. And he had the same challenges in his personal relationships that he had in doing his physics. So, how do you bond with people? It's through talking to them, through spending time with them, going through things with them. And Stephen's difficulties in communicating applied, of course, to his personal relationships, to having casual or deep conversations with people. His conversations had to be really somewhat focused and, cut short. And so I think that for most people would be a great barrier to forming bonds, and yet he was able to do it. And I talk in the book about some of the ways he did that, which was to transcend the need for in many ways to transcend the need for verbal communication altogether, and to be so expressive with his face and with his expressions and with his eyes. And he would develop a kind of a shorthand where you would I picture it like aliens communicating telepathically. and you learn how to when you do address him, how to talk in ways that he can easily answer, or to ask yes or no questions, but also to react and check in with him verbally with what you see he seemed to be seeing on his face, and to make sure you're on the same wavelength. And it was quite an effective way of communicating. Some of his best friends said to me that they thought that the words for him were, in a way, more like the spice, but the meat was the eye contact and the facial communication, and getting to know him and getting into to feel what he feels.
Yeah, and you obviously learned this very quickly to have co-authored 2 books with him, and actually to simplify some of his previous work as well, which is remarkable. But I thought we'd share with our audience some of parts of his life that we were unfamiliar with. For example, rowing in Cambridge. He rowed in Cambridge, not very well, as you say in the book, but he did. And, he's married, his children, all those type of things that people were unaware of, because, as you say, we know Stephen Hawking, the celebrity in a way, but we don't know the backstory. And you got to know that very intimately. But I thought we'd start with how you met and how you ended up actually landing in Cambridge and writing this book.
Well, he contacted me. He read my first 2 books, Euclid's Window, which was about curved space, the idea of curved space and how it developed through history, starting from the Greeks and what it means and how it's used in physics. And then I wrote a book, a memoir, just like the one I've written now about Stephen, a memoir about my relationship with Richard Feynman, who was an iconic physicist who died in the late 80s. And that's when I was first starting my career. And he had a great influence on me. And so Stephen, at that time in the early 2000s, was looking for somebody to work with, because it is so difficult for him to communicate and to write, that he wanted a co-author. And for the first book, he wasn't so much looking for someone to share the development of the book as someone to work with him to help him take his big, famous book, A Brief History of Time, and rewrite it in a way that's clearer. And he's very picky, and I guess he had been looking for a while, and I feel honored that he picked me. But he wanted someone who understood physics, but also whose writing he liked, and who he thought had a good sense of humor. And I guess that after reading those 2 books, he settled on me. He'd been looking for a while, and we wrote that. It became a book called A Briefer History of Time. So we took that book and we just revised it. It's really more of a re-edit or a remake in some ways of the original book, just meant to be clearer, keep the same spirit and most of the same words, but we cut things that were complicated. We elaborated where it was important, made things clearer. So that was a very relatively easy and a great experience, and so we did that together. But when it was over, I had this idea that we should do something much more ambitious. I had gotten to know him just a little bit because so I was at Caltech at the time, and he was, of course, at Cambridge, and he would come to Caltech for about a month or a few weeks every year. So we would meet then, or we would email each other. But it was fairly. I didn't have to go there for that book. It was fairly easy to rework that book. Then I had this idea. I was reading his papers in the early 2000s that were really fascinating to me, and I thought, his previous books, Brief History of Time, Universe in a Nutshell, Briefer History of Time, those are all about his work in the 70s and early 80s. And he's done a lot since then, and especially his work in the early 2000s I thought was really exciting and interesting. And I thought, wow, we should write a book on that. And so the next time he came to Caltech, I went to his office to say hi. I thought I'd ask him, propose this idea, and maybe he'd think about it for a while. And he, I'm thinking, he probably won't want to do that, but maybe I can convince him. But he just jumped at it. He immediately said, yeah, that's a great idea. And that was it. It took us about a year to work out the outline, and another 4 years to write the book. And this was a totally original book, starting from scratch on new material. And so it was, 10 times harder than the original book. And that's where we really bonded, because then it's where I had to start shuttling to and from Cambridge, and we had to really work intensely together to write the book. He is not, even though he has had great difficulties communicating, he didn't let that stop him from being picky and a perfectionist. So we at times we would go over every bit. So the way it worked was he wrote. So after we got our outline together, he wrote some parts, I wrote other parts, and then we would trade them. Then we would meet and discuss each other's work. And every word, he would look at every word. And I thought it was funny that he's the one who had to work so hard. He was communicating. It would come out about 6 words a minute. He'd have to, at first he used his thumb. He could move his thumb, and later that wouldn't work. So he would twitch his cheek, and he had a sensor that would read that, and it would translate to a click. And one way or another, he would use that to pick words on the computer screen, which we can talk about later if you want. But it was very tedious for him. And it's about 6 words a minute. And yet at the end, it would be me who always gave up an argument because I got worn down. Never him. He had infinite patience to just keep pecking away and saying what he wanted to say. And so we worked together very closely to get that done. And so I think the first time we met, the first time we met in his office, the first time I went to Cambridge, I remember I was still nervous because I had met him here and we'd worked together on the other book, but there hadn't been really any heavy lifting to do. And I didn't even have to go and see him in his environment. And now here I was going to the great Stephen Hawking's building, his office, all his people there. And he put aside a whole week or two just to work with me on this intensely. And so I'm going to, see what his life is like, go into his cave. And I was nervous, and I saw him, and so wasn't quite sure. Well, first when I got there, he was on the couch, which I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I had to wait outside while his door was closed, and it was basically when his carers helped him relieve himself on his couch. And then, so I waited about 10 minutes, and then they open the door. I walk in. I say some stupid, silly words. I'm so glad to be here, or how exciting this is. And then he looks at me. He starts typing away, and I'm thinking, "Oh wow, what's he going to say?" And then the word comes out, "banana." And he was he's like, "Forget you. It's time for my banana." He had mashed banana and kiwi several times a day, and it was time after his what he had done. He wanted his banana. And his carer jumps up and starts getting it ready for him. And I'm thinking, I just flew 6,000 miles to hear this and be totally ignored. But then he turned his eyes at me, and then he welcomed me, and we started working. But that's the way it was with him. It was like an oracle speaking to you sometimes.
It reminded me of because you talked about the awkward silence that ensued. Then you're like, kind of, what's he going to say? And then the banana comes out. But then I was like, going, how wise of him to get his blood sugar level up first before he engages with you. But one of the things you talked about, the sheer endeavor here by both of you, and on your side of the bridge here as well. But for Stephen to communicate was such an obstacle. But you tell us he never felt a victim. In the early days, he did, and he went through some depression, etc. But he really had massive resilience because he wasn't given long to live. But I'll come back to that, Leonard. But I wanted to share the first time, and this is just to show the challenges that you guys had when he had sweat on his brow, and you wanted to dab it to get rid of it, and you were kind of gaining in confidence in a way, but then you were kind of given a little slap on the wrist by the universe.
Well, so his carer popped out to go to the loo, and normally somebody would come in and watch, but this was going to be really quick, and she was starting to get comfortable with me being there, but it was toward the beginning, and so I'm watching him, and I'm thinking, I see a bead of sweat on his brow starting to inch its way down very gradually. And I'm going, oh, that, it was really hot, I have to say, in his office too, a lot of the time, no air conditioning. And, that kind of thing really bugs you, and you just wash it away. But just staring at it made me feel I couldn't even stand to not be him. I couldn't even stand to watch it. And to think what he was feeling. And so I asked him if I could dab it away, and he indicated, like that, yes, and with his eyebrows going up. And so I went and I did that, and And then I went to take another dab, and I could see as I was doing it that he detected some danger there, and I went too hard, and I hit his head, and he had no control over his head, so he was set up in a certain way where he's stable, and then bam, it flops over like a rag doll, and I can feel that pain too, and so I'm taking him and trying to put his head back, and now I'm like, what am I doing? I'm damaging Stephen Hawking, and I'm trying to put his head up, and his glasses slide, and his sensor could determine when his glasses were too far, and then an alarm went off there because they got to stay within a certain distance for him to talk. And so this beeping starts going, and I got his head and his sweat, and I'm like holding it, and then people start running in, going, "What's going on?" And it was a bit.
I broke him. I
broke Stephen Hawking. Yeah, that's what I thought. But again, I learned. First of all, I learned the most important thing. So I felt sorry for him in the beginning a lot for things like that because he couldn't wipe his sweat. He had to depend on someone seeing it, or he had to spend a couple minutes like saying something to someone to do that. Composing his pecking away, composing his message. But I actually. At the end, or even not at the end, but after I got to know him better, I didn't really feel sorry for him anymore that way because I learned that he just overcome that. I mean, he might have said, yes, wipe it away, but he actually learned not just that, it wasn't that he needed someone to wipe it away. He learned not to mind. He learned was to overcome, not only did he overcome his bodily limitations, but he overcame his spiritual limitations that as human beings, certain things bother us unless we can exercise our mind over the situation, unless we can take control of how we feel and really take control of our brain. And he was really able to do that. He had these many things in his life that for most people would be torture. The sweat, if you have an itch, you can't scratch it at night. He would lay in bed and he couldn't turn, so you get an ache or something, and everyone just naturally turns, or you turn even while you're asleep to keep that from happening, and he couldn't do that. I mean, he had carers who periodically would turn him, but it wasn't on demand when he needed it. In fact, and he couldn't even ask for it because when he's laying in bed, he wasn't hooked up to his computer. And so he had all these, eating and having, he would chew a little bit, but stuff would dribble down his face. I went to fancy restaurants with him, and everyone, it's a very elegant place, and he's sitting there like you're feeding a baby with this, stuff dribbling down his face, and he wasn't embarrassed. He didn't mind. He accepted everything, and he really learned to have his mind triumph over all the little insults of the day that the day threw at him every day. So it was a big thing. I strive for that in my life, and it was inspirational. I wrote the book because I found Stephen to be very inspirational. It really taught me, not just that I learned about how he dealt with life, but it taught me, gave me lessons for how I can deal with life. And I sometimes think about, I'm feeling bad about X, Y, or Z, and I think, Jesus, Stephen had to deal with that every day, and he learned to do that, and I can too. And it actually ties back to my parents, going through the Holocaust, because it's that lesson. I think that's a lesson that's been a theme in my life, and Stephen really amplified that for me, being that close with him.
Yeah, and you said that he dealt with each day with humor and positivity, and it was like a person who'd found his place in the world, and and after early challenges, and we have to say that as well. But one thing you made me think of there is, it's like, and I think about this a lot with neurodiversity in the world, and that when we harness neurodiversity, there's so many Stephen Hawkings out there, but the world needs to change how it views people and unleash their creativity, because just because you don't have certain abilities doesn't mean that you're disabled. You have an enhancement of other abilities. And I truly believe that was, it's like, I'm doing this because I'm thinking of the whole idea of the waterbed effect, where, you have these disabilities here, but you have these super abilities here. but the world has not harnessed those abilities in the past. And I think that he's done so much for the universe, so much for the world and humanity to make us see that. And hopefully that transpires and transcends into organizations so we can harness more great people out there.
Right. And he as I said, he had a superpower of communication. In physics also, he developed certain compensations and superpowers that other people don't have, and that he never would have developed if not for his physical disability. He developed a certain peculiar, I don't mean it in a bad way, I just mean unusual, geometric way of thinking that other physicists don't use. I mean, in physics we use equations, and we also use pictures or geometry. But the bulk of physics, even though the geometry is everywhere and very important, is done more what we would call analytically, with using differential equations and these kinds of other kind of math that's not purely geometrical. And and Stephen had, as Kip Thorne, his good friend, Nobel Prize winner, told me, he had a superpower of geometric thinking, because he developed, because he couldn't write equations on the blackboard or the paper like what the rest of us do. And he had an amazing kind of photographic mind where he could remember or keep a lot in his head, but it wasn't infinite. So he had to find some compensatory way of doing it. And he developed this unique, unusual geometric ways of analyzing problems. And that really allowed him to do it without using the blackboard. But it also gave him insights that other people didn't have, because he was looking at things inherently from a different way than other people were. And that allowed him to make some of his advances to the way, because he would look at things differently than other people. And that was all due to something he developed because of his disability.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I'd love to broadcast that to the world and go, look what we can do with Asperger's and autism and dyslexia and dyspraxia. That it's got these gifts that come with the challenges, like everything has. And you reminded me there. You mentioned you've written and worked with Richard Feynman. He was the same. Do you remember he talked about when he was almost too advanced for his class, and he was seen as, some teachers would have seen him as misbehaving, but one teacher said, actually, Feynman, you need to read this, and gave him something to almost shut him up, but it gave him a unique way of thinking. And I think that way of thinking is so important, and also to share that to people who have children out there who may appear to be misbehaving, because it might not be misbehavior.
I'm very sympathetic for all those parents who are like that. I was that kind of kid. I was constantly in trouble. I was totally bored in school, and so I would talk, do things, or not do what I'm supposed to, or actually I ditched school a lot, didn't show up. And I think I turned out fine. and I think that school isn't for everybody. Well, and school that's another question. So I won't go too far into it, but
that's another book, man.
And it's different in every country. But at least the school here is not aimed at, and it has nothing to do with the teachers. It's just the system and the tests that they make them take, and the curricula that they give them. But it's not geared toward creativity, imagination, and problem solving. It's toward memorization, regurgitation, and in a way, it tends to kill people's spirit, intellectual spirit, if you're not careful. And so, a lot of, I think, people who are innovative and imaginative have trouble in school because it's just doesn't suit them. It's not their approach. So Feynman was one like that, who was always a rebel and I think was bored in school. But what's interesting that you mentioned him is he's another one who was known for his geometric thinking in physics. So he was famous for that, and one of his big advances, which we call path integrals, is really a geometric way of looking at interactions that normally were looked at with equations. And he literally has these things called Feynman diagrams that he invented for doing certain calculations that are pictures of things hitting each other and going away. And from the pictures, you can infer the physics. So he was another anomaly in that sense, that he was so extremely geometric oriented.
I was talking to you before the show saying that, of this forthcoming concept for the show, I'd love you and Deepak Chopra maybe to come on and discuss the idea of colliding disciplines. Because when there's a saying in innovation that innovation happens at the intersections, and I truly believe it's because of that. So Dee Hock, who's the founder of Visa, is a great friend of the show. He's now 93, amazing man, still writing a new book. He said that one of the most valuable things in his life was reading wide and eclectically, and through that you end up connecting dots, and like you say in education, not collecting dots. And that's the genius. And you're the same, man. It's just how I explain it to my students is like, you need to learn how to collect them, not connect them, or connect them, not collect them. But one of the things I thought about you is that every experience you have is like new frames on the lens of life. And your experience with Stephen gave you unique lenses that no one else in the world would have.
Yeah, and of course, he had that, and I was able to, a lot of that, rubbed off on me, so it was a real gift to be able to work with him.
So let's get back to the
and by the way, that was his strength, of course. Sorry, but it's connecting the dots in ways that people didn't see, right? Yeah.
And you, man, I keep pointing back here because I have Elastic back there, and I've the rest of your books in my Kindle here in front of me. But
I got it somewhere here too. There.
What have you got there, man?
I've got Elastic. There you go.
Yeah.
That's the American. I don't know. I bet out there in.
I have a paperback, man.
Oh yeah.
There's the paperback.
Oh, there you go.
Right there.
Got it.
Yeah, same color, but and also everybody knows that the Max Planck license plate number behind there as well.
Well, it's funny. So since I have such a difficult name, when I make reservations in a restaurant or some place, I got tired of people that can't get the name Mlodinow right. They can't spell it or say it. They even these days they have trouble with Leonard, believe it or not. So I'm thinking I got to simplify my. Yeah, I don't know. It's just ignorance in America today, I think. But so I thought I had to simplify it. So I said, "What's a simple name?" I thought, of course, my hero Max Planck. How can you? Okay, they might leave the C out in his last name, but that's okay. But if I call a restaurant, they say, "What's your name?" I say Max Planck. I never get how do you spell this, that. They write something down, and they never know who he was. By the way, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's sad, isn't it? Yeah, it's sad that knowledge dies out, and I think he said it actually. He said science advances one funeral at a time, but you don't want that happening. Max Planck himself. But let's jump back to Stephen, because I wanted to intertwine some of the theory with his life itself, because some people don't know why he was wheelchair bound, and he was 21, 1963. And he was diagnosed with ALS, and that's what happened. And he knew it was coming, and people said, "You're drinking too much, Hawking, stop drinking too much." And then, of course, this disease gradually took hold of his body. But the interesting thing is, ALS usually gives a lifespan of 2 to 5 years after diagnosis, and he absolutely beat the hell out of that. And I truly believe it's because he had a higher purpose and something to contribute to humanity, and that's what drove him, including these friendships that he had harnessed and created with people like your good self.
Well, I think that's a big part of it. He was actually a goof off as an undergrad at Oxford, and he was studying physics. He wasn't studying very hard. He was very talented, so I'm not saying that he wasn't doing well, but he just wasn't applying himself. And when he got the diagnosis, it really, some people, when something really tragic happens, they find God, and he didn't find God in the usual sense, but he found purpose and meaning in his life. And what that was he decided that he really wanted to devote his last few years, and he thought it would just be a few years, to understanding where we came from, what the meaning or our place in the universe. I think it made him think about life and death. And so he decided to devote himself to that. And that's what he did devote his next decades to. And he thought that it would just be a few years. But in physics, that meant he turned to things like the origin of the universe, to questions like that, to real fundamental questions of the beginning. And at that time, not many people were looking at that. It was a real backwater, and for good reason, really, which is that back in the early 60s, there was no way of observing, certainly not doing experiments or observing the universe back then. It was just before the so-called discovery of the so-called cosmic microwave background radiation, which I won't get into, but that opened up a whole new way of looking back in time at the early universe. But that wasn't discovered till '64, and it was many years till we got to learn to be able to really study it in great detail and learn a lot about what happened in the early universe. So people thinking, physicists thinking, well, that the way the universe began is kind of a moot point because we can't test our theories or our ideas. So people, some people were looking at it because they were curious about what the equations said, what Einstein's equations for gravity would say about the origin and development of the universe. But because there was not this observational access to it, it wasn't a very hot field. And Stephen didn't care about that because he's first of all, he was a very stubborn guy, and he wanted to know about the beginning, and he knew that these theories could tell us, and he wanted to understand what they said. And so that's how he got started. And I think that having that drive, that meaning, that purpose, I think that's, for everyone, I think that's very important in your life. If all you do is go to work and make the donuts and then come home and, I don't know, drink beer, watch TV, and go to bed, I think you're going to get depressed. I feel that life is, people are much happier when they have whatever it is, a meaning or a purpose. It could be raising your kids. It could be doing a hobby, bird watching, painting. Whatever it is, you need a reason to get up in the morning and a reason to want to get out and to exist. And psychologists have shown that people who have that are healthier and live longer. And I think that is even more amplified in Stephen's case, because everything was so difficult for him to do that if he didn't have a reason to do it, something driving him, I think he would just let go and fade away. And to tell you the truth, I always felt that some of his work, especially not only in the 80s, but then again in the 2000s that we wrote about in the Grand Design, this new work that recent work that I wanted to write about with him, I think that really answered the questions for him about where the universe came from and why the laws of nature or physics are what they are. And even though there's still much to be done in physics, I'm not saying we've solved physics, but I think he found his answers, and I think that he was satisfied with that when he died. And I think in a way, from what I've heard about his last months, his letting go really came because he felt that he had satisfied his life ambition.
There's a line I pulled that I absolutely loved, because it's about finding those great moments in life, but also about seeing how good we have it, really, and it's so important in these chaotic times that we have right now. You said, we all know we will die. For most of us, that is an abstract thought, but it wasn't for Stephen, and it's not for you. Stephen said it inspired him to value each of his remaining days. And so he milked the most out of life that he possibly could. And I thought that was inspiring in many ways. But it reminded me of the story of when you went rowing and you were relegated after the brow incident to holding the pink handbag.
Yeah, well, one afternoon, one of his carers asked me if I wanted to go rowing. We could see from Stephen's face that he wanted to join us. So I was a little bit surprised, but what the activity it was called punting down the cam, which I suppose people in England and Ireland know what that means. But for us in the States, what is that? And that's a flat boat that's somewhat unstable, it seems. And I know that I've heard of them being tipped over and people falling off. And it just seemed like a rather adventurous thing, something that perhaps he shouldn't be doing because of the nature of it. But Stephen Stephen, he did everything. There was nothing. He went on the Vomit Comet, which is a plane that flies, a 747 that flies in parabolic paths. And so on the way down, you're weightless, and he's floating around. And you can imagine his doctors didn't want him to do that. And no one knew what that would do to someone who couldn't move or had the disability that he had. But he just wanted to do everything. He wanted to go up into space. Richard Branson said that when he gets the space plane going, he will take him into space, and he was ready for that. So this was maybe in his universe a little thing, but to me it was a big thing. And so we had to take him, pack him up, which takes a while, take the van down, and then you can't drive right to the river, so you're up on the street. There's all these uneven stone steps. You got to carry him down, and you got to take him out of his wheelchair, unhook him from his method of communication, take off his whatever, his medical stuff isn't there, and you got to kind of, these two women, like, 100-pound women, and there I am, more like almost 200, 180, and I'm going, I can carry him. They're going, no, you're gonna hurt him. And so one takes his legs, one takes his head, and then they carry my purse. And so they're carrying him, and his head now is flopping around. So I'm realizing, okay, I guess that happens. And they're carrying him down the steps, and I'm following them. And when we get in, they go and they position him so he's laying there, and one of them is one of his carers is cradling his head. And what happened is, as he looks left and right, they'll turn his head so you can see what he's trying to look at. And so they're in the boat position, and now I got to climb in, and I'm unsteady, and I almost fall. And he starts laughing, he puts a big smile on his face because I'm the one who's having problems getting in there, and I'm again always thinking I'm going to tip it over and he's going to drown. But it was fine, and they're feeding him champagne and strawberries. I guess that's the custom. Someone is, the way the boat works is someone stands on the end with a big pole, kind of like in Venice, and pushes you down against the bottom and pushes you along. And it was a wonderful time, and it just showed me that don't think he's not going to do something, because don't think he can't do something. Don't think he's not going to do something because of his disability. Whatever is there, he's open to it.
I'd love to come back to, you said he had a sense of knowing what was going on with the universe, and maybe we'll finish on that. But I just wanted to share how I wanted to wrap back in meaning and purpose, because we saw this actually with his wife, because he was married. He married the same year he was diagnosed with ALS. He took a serendipitous step onto a train platform in St. Albans in London. And it was that moment that actually changed his life immeasurably as well. But that ultimately led to a divorce. And I thought it was interesting because what I read from between the lines was that his wife loved him dearly, absolutely, but she had no meaning in that relationship. And that actually was a huge challenge. I hope I've set that up okay.
Yeah, I think so. So she had her own career that she was interested in academia. It was, I think, Spanish literature, and but being with Stephen, especially as the years went on, became more and more of a full-time job because he needed more and more help. And in the early days, he didn't have the money to have the assistance that he would need, moving around, being fed, bathed, going to the bathroom, and so she would have to do all that. And then as of course his work consumed him, and then his fame when he wrote A Brief History of Time, it became a situation where everything was about Stephen, I think, and I think that she lost herself in the end, and that's why I think that's why they drifted apart, because just being married to someone who's that intensely focused on the work is a challenge. Being married to someone who's very famous and is always going around the world is a challenge. Being married to someone who is disabled and needs a lot of help is a challenge. So she had the trifecta of challenges there. And I think it just eventually wore down the marriage.
I wanted to just share that, people didn't just see the celebrity physicist Stephen Hawking, that there was so much humanity and so much experience behind getting there. Like, it wasn't an overnight success by any means, but also the quality of stubbornness I think it was George Bernard Shaw said all progress depends on the unreasonable man. So you need to actually challenge things. You need to be willing to put yourself out there. This show, Leonard, a lot of change makers, entrepreneurs, people working in large organizations who want to change those organizations work there. But one of the biggest challenges is conformity, because nobody likes being told they're wrong, but it's very much part of your world because you build upon other people's work, but you also challenge the heck out of it. And I'd love your thoughts on that idea of being the challenger, because you are one, Max Planck was one, Stephen was certainly one.
Well, see, that's what I wrote the book Elastic about, that there's two ends of human thinking, two types of thinking. One is logical analytical thinking. That's good for a situation that you're familiar with, that you've encountered before, where you know the framework, you know what concepts to use to analyze the problem. There's certain assumptions that you're going to make that before you attack the problem. You know what your goals are, and you're just applying the rules of logic from A to B to C to go to your conclusion. And that is what people think of as science and math is like that. You're very analytical, logical. It's not really. I mean, it's partially that, but that's not all of it. I mean, that's not, maybe I would argue, not the most important part, but that's the part that people think of. When you apply for a job, most companies are looking for that, and it's what universities test for in their tests, right? In their admissions tests. But the other end of thinking is what I call elastic thinking, and that's the kind of thinking that you need when you encounter a new situation or a change situation. So when you encounter something you haven't seen before, you have to create in your mind, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, you have to create a framework of how you're understanding this situation. What are the concepts you're going to use? What assumptions are you going to make? What are the rules of logic you should use? Or what are your goals even, right? And so that's elastic thinking. And that's the kind of thinking that people traditionally could understand that artists and writers perhaps need, but they didn't see that the great usefulness elsewhere. But as times are changing so rapidly now, our lives are changing. We're constantly being challenged with learning new apps on the computer, or facing changing work situations, COVID, globalization, the political turmoil. Everything is constantly providing us with challenges or situations that we have to understand new. Or if you're an innovator, if you're trying to keep ahead because everything is being, technology is advancing so quickly now, and you want to innovate, then you have to be able to question the way that you're seeing things. You have to be able to say, what are my assumptions? What assumptions am I making? What's my framework of thought? How could it be different? And that way you'll come up with new ideas. Einstein, for example, special relativity. Special relativity, any high school kid could do. The mathematics is just high school algebra. So you could take any high school kid today, and you could tell them what the problem is, and they could do the algebra to find special relativity. So why was Einstein a genius, and the other physicists looking around in that time didn't find that? They were trying to solve a certain problem at the speed of light, and they were experts, and they were trying to solve it using their expertise in known physics. And Einstein had a different frame of mind. He had a different mindset. He was a young guy. He wasn't even in academia, right? And he was like a rebel. And he's going, well, forget about what I know, what I think I know. Let me look at what it takes to figure this out, and let me work backwards to see how I should change what we thought we knew, in order to conform with that. That's a different mindset. So Stephen's mindset was always like that. It was always questioning, looking for the new thing, not accepting what other people said. And looking at it himself in his own new ways, trying to understand what are the assumptions that I'm making that I don't realize I'm making, and then I can question them once I know what they are, and what other assumptions could I make. And so he was a groundbreaking physicist in that way, and that's really Max Planck. I mean, the same thing. That's what's, every physicist, theoretical physicist, has to be really good at logical, analytical reasoning. But what makes you a great physicist, and the kind that is remembered, is the elastic thinking, the thinking outside of the box, the thinking where you're looking at something in a new way, or you're creating new concepts and a new approach, and that's what's really valuable in innovation and pushing society ahead.
Man, I wanted to talk to you about elastic. We'll do it again. We'll have to do it again.
I mean, it's very related to Stephen, but
yeah. No. Let's honor the man. But you reminded me of a quote by Einstein: "We can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." And that's what he's talking about. That your frameworks, your mental models update, and then so do the models have to update. And that's why I think the value of neurodiversity is so valuable, because if somebody sees the same problem differently, they'll have a chance of solving it then differently. Like if you're stuck, the mental models need to be unlearned and relearned, etc. And I think, that's what I really got out of Elastic as well, is that way of thinking that we need to unlearn and relearn and keep doing so more than ever before. And I think one of the big challenges, Leonard, as you know, is when we get into organizations, when we get into positions in life, we tend to batten down the hatches and defend what we've achieved rather than being open for challenge and for new information.
Yeah, it's a very much so. It's a very debilitating effect. That's one reason why often people who in science, for example, get very successful then stop churning out great work, because they get into a certain mindset in it, which is even more even harder to become free of when you're the one who invented the framework. And so you can't move on and see things in a different way. Whereas the new kids, like Max Planck said, science advances funeral after funeral, because you have great ideas, you get stuck in a certain mindset and you move on, and you can't move, you die. New people come in, they are not stuck, like Hawking when he was younger and decide to go into this, ask these questions like Einstein, and then they make their advances, and then they often get stuck. There's crazy stories. When Stephen Hawking first got to Cambridge, for example, there was Fred Hoyle, a very talented, famous physicist who made a lot of great advances, but he was stuck because he believed in something called the steady state theory. The evidence was that it was totally wrong, and it's time to move on to the new Big Bang theory. And Stephen actually wanted to work for Hoyle. He didn't realize all this at the time when he was coming in, but Hoyle was the big shot. And Hoyle had too many students, so luckily Stephen didn't work for him and worked for somebody else. But Hoyle was stuck in that thinking, and his whole career crashed because he couldn't let go of that successful but wrong, seemingly successful but wrong idea that had been superseded of the steady state theory. And so people keep looking for ways to fix it, ways to save it, ways to modify it, to keep it, rather than going, let's just let go of that and do something new. And I talk about I think it was in Elastic. I talked about a study at a cardiac ward in a hospital where they found that the patients have a lower mortality rate when the most senior doctors are away at conferences. And they realize that what happens is, look, someone comes in with a standard thing, and the junior people know how to treat it, the senior people know how to treat it, no problem, they're fine. Somebody comes in with a non-standard problem that's a bit odd. What happens is the experts tend to put the square peg in a round hole and view it. They don't notice the novelty or that it needs a new approach, and they just treat them the conventional way, and they die. And the new people see they're freer to see that it's different and to react to it. And it's interesting, there have been other studies along those lines that show the same thing. A study of chess experts, for example, that a lot of times the experts looking at certain problems are blind to seeing things because they know too much. And people who are more novices find the solutions to these problems quicker because the solutions require a certain unconventional thinking, and they're free of the conventional thinking, and the experts aren't. So that's a big barrier to progress.
That's a human trait. They're not broken. Sometimes it's hubris, but not always. Sometimes you just get stuck in your thinking, and you need to be elastic with your thinking and be more open to it. What ways do you suggest for, like, a lot of business people, a lot of CEOs listen to this show, Leonard, for them in a business context? Because I know you were on a phenomenal tour before lockdown around the world on Elastic, so you would have went and spoke to a lot of senior organizations.
There's a lot of things. There's things you can do in a corporation. For example, there's a top-down approach to management, and then there's a bottom-up approach, just like your brain has a top-down and bottom-up thinking. So top-down means CEO or senior executives just make all the decisions of what to do, and people below that execute. Or in your brain, there's structures that govern where your attention goes and where your focus goes, and how how the rest of your brain should process information. So that's the top-down. And bottom up is when in an organization you have the people who are on the ground doing things feel free to innovate and to suggest changes, and the upper levels are willing to look at that. And for instance, in biology, a good example of bottom up is ants. So each ant is a very simple creature that doesn't have the big picture and doesn't really know. Doesn't really know the big picture of where the ants are going or what they're trying to do, but they have their own little job to do. And there's no boss at all telling the little ants what to do. The queen, of course, is not really a boss. The queen is just there for reproduction. And yet, when these ants are on a leaf and there's another leaf nearby, they'll form a human or an ant bridge from one leaf to the other. And it's all the little ones having their little reactions to their own particular situation that on the whole creates something that's much greater than the sum of its parts. It's almost as if there's an architect or an engineer, but it isn't. It's all the little things building up. So that's bottom up. So an and your brain has neurons. All your ideas come from bottom up. All your brain has dumb neurons that are just components that take in input, and when it reaches a threshold, put out fire. And they have no idea what you're trying to do or who you are, but the 100 billion of them that you have working together creates you, right? So in organizations, you want both, but some organizations are much too top down. You want to allow bottom up, so you want to make it free and encourage, the ideas of people getting together, trading ideas, and you have to listen to them. At a personal level, you have to also listen to your brain. You have to don't be afraid of being wrong. It's very important to be okay with being wrong. As a theoretical physicist, I know that I'm wrong most of the time. Most of your ideas, if you're a theoretical physicist, by far are wrong. You try this, you try that, nothing works. You just keep plugging away till you get something that's good, right? But people in general get defensive, embarrassed. They don't like to make mistakes. They don't want anyone to know. They want to hide that. They want to argue that it's not really a mistake. You got to let go of that. That's very important, because your brain on the unconscious level has many, many ideas, crazy ideas, brilliant ideas, silly ideas, conventional ideas. And he has so many ideas, whatever you're trying to do, that it doesn't present, your brain does not present them all to you. There are filters that keep them in your unconscious mind and don't let them come to your consciousness. These filters say, this and that has worked in the past. Let's present those ideas. Your brain is making predictions about what will work, and it's presenting you the most promising ideas, which are the most conventional. If you ever want those other weird ideas to pop up, you need to learn to relax those filters, and being afraid of being wrong tightens the filters. It makes only the most conventional come. If you want innovative ideas, you have to learn to open up. That's what Elastic was about, ideas like that. So there's things that you can do, and things you can do in your organization. And don't punish people for having a wrong idea. I mean, I'm not saying people who are incompetent, you should reward them, but this is not incompetence. Some ideas just don't work, but they could still be a good idea. You want to reward ideas. You want to have people not be afraid of being wrong, not be afraid of failing. And the same for you.
Man, we have to do a show on Elastic. We were talking before we came on air about stuff like AI and aliens and lots of stuff that was in Stephen's kind of consciousness. And I thought we talk a lot about it on the show about AI, but about the alien stuff, because a lot of stuff has been blown out of proportion. You were his friend. You had great conversations, because I mentioned about your friendship, and you mentioned about the restaurant. Stephen used to love to connect over having a meal together. That was his way of really connecting. And I'm sure you had lots of conversations about aliens. I'd love if you'd share something there as a kind of a final story before we wrap up.
Well, it's interesting because we have no evidence that there are aliens, and Stephen was very much, being a scientist, very much evidence-based. But he he did think that there were aliens, not that there's aliens flying around here, or that when your neighbor who says that they were abducted is not delusional, but he believes that in the universe that there are aliens, because his whole life was devoted to understanding our place in the universe. And one thing that he realized is that we're a natural phenomenon. We're not special in the sense of being the only life forms here, that we're just a natural phenomenon, just like algae or the clouds on Venus. And so, of course, he would think about, well, if there are aliens, how does that affect us, and what's going to happen? And he felt that the chances of aliens finding us are very, very slim, of our having, contact with flyby aliens, as you see in science fiction movies. And I think that one way to see why that would be is that the universe is very sparse. There are a lot of stars in the observable universe, 100 billion stars in our galaxy, but they're very far apart. If you take a bullet or a projectile and you just fire it out, the chances over the next billion years that you'll hit anything are practically zero. Everything is just so spread out, and it takes, of course, time to get from place to place because there's a limit in time, but because of the speed of light. However, Stephen didn't stop Stephen from speculating about how would they be if they did get here. And it wasn't a very happy picture he found. He thought that the aliens, that if aliens came here, they'd more likely be what we would consider the evil, destructive type than the kind that's going to come in peace and say, let's all trade technology theories. And I think that's because, look, any civilization that is so far advanced that they can travel from one star to another, and we know the challenges there. We can't even yet send people to Mars in our own solar system. So you can imagine being able to go to stars that are light years away. Any civilization that's that advanced would not look at us as equals. So if let's say we go to Mars and we find, oh, look, there's little squirrels on Mars and there's cows, and wow, we didn't realize that from the rover. They didn't find that, but actually there's quite a nice kinds of wildlife here on Mars. Well, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to use the horses as beasts of burden, maybe as our pets. We're going to ride them around. We're going to eat the cattle or the pigs or whatever we do. Right? We're going to treat them like animals, and that's how I think aliens coming here would treat us. We might think that we're, leaps and bounds above pigs and cows and fish that we eat, but I think the aliens might not think that. And so that's a scary thought, because it's not that they're evil at all, but it's just that in the natural scheme of things, they may see us as food or pets, put us in cages. And when you think about that, though, you realize that be kind to animals, because that, to me, that's what that says, and maybe be a vegetarian. So, and maybe if we're lucky, the aliens will be.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic way of thinking again. And, there's so much empathy in your writing in this book, and it's been a fascinating talk with you and a great read. And I really look forward to having you back on the show again. There's so much. Guys, if you're going to buy a book, Leonard's books are fantastic. Elastic is brilliant. Subliminal is brilliant. Feynman's Rainbow, absolutely really enjoyable reads. I thought a great way to finish would be, you talked about your final moment, and Stephen didn't believe in an afterlife, but when you were in the church and looking at the program with a smiling face of Stephen on it, you really felt, as you lay there in the coffin, that he was still with you in some way. And I thought that was a beautiful memory and a beautiful way to finish from my perspective. But I'd like to give you the final word and what you'd like to say, I suppose, about your great friend.
Well, it's funny because I always thought, despite the fact that Stephen each year would have multiple episodes where his life was in danger, I always thought that he would outlive me, and so it was hard to even accept when I heard the news that he hadn't. And I was on the aisle in the church when they were carrying his coffin past, and so there he was in the box. And even though there was a box there, I knew he was in it, and I just felt like he was there and still with us. It was, it was a very moving feeling. And I think that even though I agree, I feel as he did that don't believe in the afterlife or the kind of God that plays a role in human life. I do feel that his spirit is still here. It's still with all of us who knew him and were affected by him, just as my mother's is still with me. So I think in that way we all live on, and he has, by affecting so many people, he's lived on in a very big way.
A brilliant quote by Stephen that I thought was so apt and so interconnecting with Elastic is that he said this absolutely prophetic and brilliant quote, which is intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, which is what we all need to do in this world of ultimate change. It will never stop changing. It will change faster and faster. Leonard, for people who want to find you, where can they find out about your books, your blogs, your talks, etc.?
Well, you can Google me if you get my name spelled right, and you can always get my name by just going to Amazon or somewhere and seeing who's the co-author with Stephen. You'll find me, but I'm on Twitter, and my handle is @Mlodinow, @LMLODINOW, and the same for Instagram. And the books are, as I say, you can find them wherever books are sold, at your local store or online, or I've had a pleasure writing them. I would hope you have a pleasure reading them.
It's been a pleasure for me reading, and an absolute pleasure speaking to you and honouring your great friend Stephen Hawking, author of Stephen Hawking, a memoir of friendship and physics. Leonard Mlodinow, thank you for joining us. Did I say it right there?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah,
so that was good. All right.